Aloha and welcome to the G'day Sally show. I'm Sally Squires, entertaining the world, and tonight I'm reading stories from my children's book Pockets, The Coat of Hidden Treasure. It's a book full of adventure stories that are set in different countries around the world. And this one tonight is called BALTHAZAR BAKSHEESH'S Booty. He said his name was BALTHAZAR BAKSHEESH and that he had been watching me for days. He knew I would be just the lad to do a small errand for him. He'd been following me ever since I left our small cottage to do an errand for my mother. She said not to be long because dinner would be ready when I got back. I told him I was already busy on my mother's errand, but he would not even listen. He clamped his strong arms around me and said, "Boy, if you do this one small task for me, you and your mother will never have to worry about money for the rest of your life." Knowing that my mother would worry and scold me roundly when I got home, I decided to take the plunge and follow him, even if it did make me late. Watching my mother worrying for the last 5 years since my father had died, I felt I could not pass up an opportunity to make her rich at last. Even though, at 10 years old, I should have been carefree and careless, I knew what a struggle life was for my mother. To stop her worrying and to be able to take care of her for the rest of her life had been my one dream these last fatherless years. I often worked odd jobs for the merchants of the port of Marseille. That's in France, in case anybody doesn't know. There were many of them, and they knew too how hard I would work for my mother. Some of them were kind enough to pay me more than they should have for the small tasks they gave me. I had saved every penny I had earned so far and was planning to give my mother a surprise for her birthday when I handed her the tin box of coins that I had buried in our backyard under the old oak tree. Suddenly Balthazar stopped, and a look of excitement swept over his face. "Do you like coins, son?" he asked me with a mysterious smile. I nodded. "Gold coins?" His face took on an even greater beaming smile. "Then that is what this task will bring you. Gold coins for your mother and you." Then he lapsed into silence and motioned for me to join him as he jumped up onto a passing cart, which I could tell was heading out to the reef outside the city. It seemed like a long time, but there was still a golden light on the ocean as we finally jumped off the cart. The driver had not noticed us until he felt the cart's weight lighten as we both swung off onto the sandy ground. Balthazar smiled and waved at him as the driver gave us an angry look and shook his fist. Pointing to the waves breaking on the reef at least 200 yards offshore, Balthazar smiled again with that mysterious smile. "I know you can swim, son. I've been watching you swim every morning for the past week." I was very surprised that he'd been watching me for so long and that I'd not noticed him. But maybe I hadn't seen him because I was so focused on diving down to carefully select a fish to catch with my bare hands for my mother's dinner. I would never use a bait or a line. That would not be fair on the fish. I reasoned that I gave the fish the chance to escape by using just my bare hands. We walked out to the shoreline, and he pointed to a spot to one side of where I had been just that morning. "That's where I want you to dive," he said, pulling out a net sack from an old weathered leather bag he'd been carrying. He handed it to me. At first I was puzzled. Did he want me to catch him some fish? "Once you go down to the reef," he said with a very serious tone, "you will see a big rock on the ocean floor. It has the shape of a ship, but not a large ship," he hurriedly added. "It's just a small inshore schooner size." Then he stopped and shook my shoulder. "Are you listening, boy? This is important." I nodded. "When you see the ship, you will look for the anchor. I know it is somewhere just under the hull. Now I know you are strong enough to do this. You will have to lift up the anchor with both hands and drag it to one side. Then you will see the shape of three, note boy, 3 old amphoras, large earthenware jars." He pulled a sharp-pointed stone out of his leather bag and handed it to me. Smash each of the 3 jars with this stone. They should break easily. They have been down there in the briny for years. Inside each one, you will see the glitter of gold coins. I want you to fill up this net with the coins. Now you might have to bring them to me in 2 or 3 trips. There are many down there. Off you go. I was worried about the light. It was fading fast, but I knew just where he meant me to go, as I had seen this ship shape many times on my dives for fish for my mother. The sea in the morning is usually quite calm and the waves are friendly, but later in the day the sea breezes whip them up into rough patterns of hard-hitting water, and that was what faced me as I dove in and started to swim out to the reef. Knowing exactly where to dive and how deep to dive was a blessing, as I knew that time was against me as I swam. The net bag he had given me slapped against my face as I swam, but I tried to ignore it and focus on my task. At last I was above the dive spot, and I looked back to see him waving at me to show that I was at the right spot on the reef. It was dark under the water as I made my first dive. I knew that my hands and feet were going to be as important as my eyes at this time of the setting sun. I had tucked the pointed stone into my pants and I could feel its sharpness against my skin as I made the first dive. To my relief, I reached the ship the first time and I looked around anxiously for the anchor. I tried to move it, but it seemed to be stuck fast and I had to surface again to get more air. I floated on the top of the water and took in many big gulps of air before I tried again. This time I got it to move to one side, and I could see one of the large jars on its side before I had to surface again. Each time I reached the surface, I could see that the sky was darkening. This is it, I said to myself. This time I will stay down until I have the gold coins in the bag. Down I went, and taking the stone out of my pants, I smashed it hard against the first amphora. Praise God, it broke open, and the glint of gold hit me as I looked down. I couldn't believe my eyes. A heap of gold coins spilled out at my feet, and I scooped up as many as I could, filling the sack almost to the brim. Now was the hardest part, to get the heavy sack to the surface while I still had a little breath left. My lungs were bursting as I finally dragged myself and the sack up to the surface. The sky was dark blue with twilight, and I could see the moon shining weakly high above. I dragged myself back to the shoreline where Balthazar was waiting. Joyfully he grabbed me and snatched the sack from me. The weight of it made him fall to his knees on the sand. "Good boy, you've done it. Is this all there is?" he asked anxiously. I knew there were more down there, but I also knew that if I went down again, I would not be going home to my mother that night. By then the light had gone, and even though there was moonlight, I felt it was far too dangerous to attempt another dive. "That's all," I said. "You lied to me. There's only one jar down there, and I emptied it completely." He gave me a silly sort of guilty grin. "You're right," he said. "There is only one jar." Then straightening himself up, he reached into the bag and pulled out a handful of coins. There were so many that it still looked full after he'd pulled out the coins which he handed to me. "Here," he said. "You're a good boy. You did your part well. These are for you and your mother." I left him there on the beach, not sure how he was going to get back or what he was going to do with the heavy bag of coins. He didn't try to stop me. Maybe he had an accomplice waiting to help him carry away the coins. It was very late when I finally got home to find my mother beside herself with worry. At first she didn't believe me when I showed her the gold coins. We counted them at the kitchen table. There were 20 of them. Some of them were covered in green algae, but surprisingly some of them were still quite bright. Finally my mother rubbed my head. "You know we can't keep them," she said. I was shocked. "But Mother, this is the end of all your worries." She shook her head. "They don't belong to us. You know that in your heart. We must go and see the captain and turn them in. First thing in the morning we will go down to the police station. Now go and sleep." Reluctantly I walked with her to the station. She urged me to tell the captain the whole story, showing him the coins. He wrote down exactly what I said. Then he called to his lieutenant and sent him and his men off in search of Balthazar. I thought that was the end of an eventful night, But as we were about to leave, the captain opened up his safe and handed my mother a paper. It was a very official-looking document. "There is a reward for finding of the coins," he said, "and as you have turned in these coins and provided us with the information, you will be eligible for the reward." 3 days later, the captain visited us in our cottage. He had a surprise for us. Last night, the lieutenant and his men had arrested Balthazar and the cart driver who had been his accomplice. Balthazar was not unknown to them and had graced their prison cells several times in the past, where he would be their guest yet again with his friend the cart driver. Then the captain had another surprise. The reward for the return of the coins was 10% of the total. He asked my mother if I would help them bring up the remaining coins from the reef. Once the total count had been made, we would receive the reward. "Monsieur le Capitaine, will it mean that my mother never has to worry about money again?" I asked him. "Bien sûr," he said with a smile. You know, Hawaii is a microcosm of the world, with people here from all over the world. And Noa Hawaii is a microcosm of the traditional arts of the world, with beautiful patterns from many countries. They've been in business for more than 40 years with wonderful Hawaii-designed batik clothing. Their hand-dyed and handmade clothes have patterns that are based on traditional kapa and tapa designs from Hawaii, Polynesia, Micronesia, Indonesia, even New Zealand and Africa. So check out the wonderful items that Noa has on their website, www.noanoahawaii.com.